So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jan Lindblad, and welcome to Klimatriksdagen, the digital track. The topic we are talking about in this session here today is climate citizen assemblies, or citizen juries, as they sometimes refer to. And the host today is me, Jan, and I have invited some very well-known people in these circles when it comes to citizen assemblies. It's Marie and Antoine from France. And Marie is a French senior consultant at Publica. I hope I pronounced that reasonably correct. And it's a firm specialized in consultations and collaborative dialogue. And Publica organized the French Citizen Convention on Climate along with two other firms. And Marie was the facilitator for the thematic group of eating. And then we have Antoine, who is a French senior consultant at Open Source Politics, which works on digital participation tools like Deliberative. He's also in charge of R&D projects with a PhD candidate at EHESS in Paris. I know they like these 5- and 6-letter abbreviations in France. I'm a Francophile, by the way. Antoine took part in the setup of a local citizen climate convention and also of a local assembly remaining municipal participation mechanism. We also invited Louise Caldwell from Ireland to participate here, but she will not be able to come, unfortunately, because she's taking care of a whole group of Ukrainian refugees right now. So the program speaks about our experiences from Ireland, and I'm not sure we're going to get so much of that today, unfortunately. So the agenda for this session is that I will be presenting some short backgrounds on what is citizen juries or citizen climate assemblies are about. But I'm no expert at all. So Antoine and Marie are the real experts, but I will give you a brief background for the layman, kind of for people that are new to this concept. Then we will invite Antoine and Marie to make their presentations about what happened in Paris and France in general, and maybe other experiences. Since they are well established in this area, I suppose they know a lot about other things as well. And towards the end, I'd like to open up for questions and answers in general from anybody on the call here today. And as you probably noticed when you connected to the meeting, this is being recorded, and we will publish the result on YouTube. So if you raise your hand later, when I ask you to come in with questions, you can raise your hand and speak, but that will be part of the recording. If you prefer not to, you can just type in the chat, and I will be reading the questions from the chat if you want to remain not so prominent in this recording. Very good. Any comments or questions about the agenda for today before we get in here? You know, at the bottom of the Zoom window here, you have the reactions button. So if you click on reactions, you can raise your hand, or you can give a thumbs up or clap your hands, or whatever it is that you like to communicate to the whole group. I will be trying to keep an eye on the chat window too, but if there's a lot of chat messages, I will not be able to do that in real time. I don't see any particular reactions or questions, so I'll dive right in. So, as we all know, democracy in the world, we all thought that democracy in the world was growing and to more countries and getting better all the time. If it was, at least when I was a teenager or 10, 20 years ago. But there has been quite a bit of backlash when it comes to the democracy in the world in the last 10 or 20 years. You have the Trump and the polarization, you have many things that are making, the number of people that are participating in political parties is decreasing in most countries. So there's need maybe for some sort of democratic innovation. And there are a number of different possibilities that we have in this area. One of them is citizen suggestions, or in Swedish, that's Medborgarförslag, which basically is the people, citizens or people that live in a particular area or region can send suggestions to the politicians. and they might listen or they might not. Another deeper kind of democratic mechanism might be deliberative polls, where you have you have your traditional polls that you can referendums. Basically, you send out the questions to the public, and the public votes on it, and there might be some debate. But these are quite expensive and far between, and the process there is not always the best. So another kind of a variant of that is deliberative polls, where you do some sort of things similar to what newspapers do with polls of the opinion of people. But with the deliberative polls, you also give people some background material and time to think, maybe over a weekend. Maybe everybody goes to a place and thinks for a bit and then has a sort of referendum or vote on this question. And then we have the really advanced matters that we're talking about here today. It's citizen assemblies or citizen juries, which usually take many months or maybe even years in some cases, where people are selected at random and are given training, and they can even control a bit what sort of information they will be given before they make a sort of decision and come up with proposals. I'd say that when it comes to citizen assemblies, there are 4 phases. Marie and Antoine can correct me and describe, but this is how I see it anyway. The first phase is that we need to convince somebody, some organization or some state or something like that to hold this citizen assembly or citizen jury. There's a lot of work, and that's where we are in most places in Sweden. We have to go to some commune, or we have to go to the government and say, we need this, and convince them to actually pull this through. So that's the convincing phase. If that goes through, we come to the second phase, which is the preparations. How do you actually execute this? How do you select people? How do you find the relevant material to present there? After these preparations have been done, you actually go to the execution phase, where people meet, they discuss, they listen to things, they talk about, and then propose some sort of changes. And then the fourth phase is the impact. Okay, so how does society react to the findings of the citizen jury or citizen assembly? How do we actually make these thoughts take effect? Of course, there is a selection process here, and since this is a democratic movement, it has to be some sort of democratic foundation to it. We can't just let everybody who is interested in the topic say, hey, I want to talk about this, because then there's no democratic foundation to it. We have to have some other sort of selection process of who gets to be there. So we get all kind of views and also representation from all age groups, gender groups, whatever else that might matter, background, education, whatever it is. So you have a representative selection. We have to decide about how much time this should be given. And if a lot of people have to spend a lot of time on this, do we compensate them in some way for the time spent on improving society? Then there is a deliberation process, which is how do these selected people spend time to discuss and think about how can they control which experts they will call. All of this is in the deliberation process. And before you can launch a citizen assembly or citizen jury, you have to decide on what is the agenda, what is the scope, what is the question that we're going to ask these people, what is it that we want to know. And finally, we have to think about, okay, so let's say that we launch a citizen jury like this. How can we take the result of that and implement it in politics? If we start this thing, do we have to do everything that they come up with? Or is there some vetting process or other democratic process that takes care of implementing this later? There has been a lot of different citizen assemblies around the world. I'll just mention a few here that might be sort of well known. There was a global assembly in Glasgow in conjunction with COP26 last year. So some people got together and decided things there. If you go back a bit further, in Belgium in 2011, there was an NGO that collected 5,000 suggestions around 25 themes. And it's not exactly a citizen jury maybe, but it was an interesting democratic initiative. In Canada, in British Columbia, and in Ontario in 2004 and 2006, there was citizen assemblies around the topics of electoral reform. What should the voting system work for? How should it be changed and reformed in Canada? There was many of these in Denmark in the 1980s. And I hope to hear a lot more about the ones in France in 2019 and 2020, the Citizens' Convention for Climate. And we also had in Ireland in 2012 and 2014, there were some amendments to the constitution. And in 2016, about abortion, there was also discussions around fixed term parliaments and referendums. The difficult question is population aging, and one of them was about climate change. In Netherlands in 2006, there was a citizen assembly on electoral reform. There was in Poland in 2016 around in Gdansk specifically, because they had problems with flooding and they wanted to discuss how to deal with that. In UK, there was a climate change citizen assembly in 2020, and in Scotland in 2019, there was the future of the country, especially around Brexit. And in Washington State, there was another citizen assembly on climate change in Washington State, 2021. So I don't know if this is a good background or covering, but this is what you sort of, if you Google a bit and go to Wikipedia, this is what you learn.
Dance for donuts, dance for donuts.
Sorry about
dance
that.
for donuts, A is for apple pie, eat enough, you're gonna die. B is for butter, eat a foot long stick of butter. C is for cookie.
Sorry about that. That's what happens if you are trying to be democratic and send the links in a wide audience. You get some of those. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the real experts. I don't know, Antoine and Marie, who wants to go first?
I will start.
Very welcome, Marie.
So Antoine, if you can share your screen, please. So yeah, while Antoine is sharing his screen, just a bit of an introduction. So yeah, today I will talk about the French Citizen Convention on Climate, which was held between October 2019 and February 2021. And so I was one of the facilitators who conceived the deliberation process and organized the convention and accompanied the citizens to help them work together. So yeah, thank you. You can put the first slide, please. So yeah, I'd like to begin with the objectives and organization of the CCC. So the CCC was decided by the President of the Republic in response to an important political crisis that you may have heard about. It was called the Yellow Vests protests against the implementation of a carbon tax in France. So the President of the Republic decided to organize this convention to include citizens and social issues in political decisions for climate change. And so the question asked to the citizens was the following: how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030 in a spirit of social justice. So 150 citizens were to be gathered during several working sessions to propose measures that can be submitted either to referendum, to a vote in parliament, or to be implemented directly by regulation. So the measures had to be written in legal language and to be very precise. And so the President of the Republic promised that these measures, if they followed the requirements, were to be implemented without a filter, that is to say, without any action by the government. And so when the convention was announced, there were many critics and skepticism about it, because most of the public thought that it was a communication stunt organized by the government. Many politicians, especially on the right side of the political scale in France, criticized this process. And especially climate and environmental associations and specialists criticized the convention because they thought that solutions already existed for a long time and were proposed by experts for many years, so they didn't understand the organization of this convention. And in order to accompany the citizens, there was a very, very important organization that was set in place. First, a governance committee composed of 15 people, and their role was mainly to organize the convention in order to respect the mandate given by the government. There were 3 guarantors who were nominated to observe the process and to guarantee the convention's independence. There were technical experts who helped the citizens to evaluate the measures' impact on climate, and legal experts who translated the measures in law language. And finally 15 facilitators. So I was one of them, who conceived the program, facilitated the work during the sessions, etc. And so just for information, there were constantly many other people gravitating around the convention while the citizens worked, such as researchers, journalists, documentary filmmakers, and so that added to the already important pressure that the citizens felt. Yeah, thank you. So let's now move on to the selection process of the members. So the sortition of the members was organized by a survey institute, and in order to recruit the panel, 255,000 people were contacted by phone in 2 months with telephone numbers that were generated randomly. So the panel had to respect different quotas regarding gender, age, level of education, social professional categories, residency, so urban or rural areas, and geographical area, so regions, departments, including overseas territories. And so the goal was that these quotas had to be roughly the same as in French society. So at the beginning, the majority of the people who accepted to participate were male, old-aged, and highly qualified. And so as we went along the recruitment process, the most difficult categories remained, for example, young single moms and without any diplomas. And so at the end, we had 150 people who were representative of the diversity of the French population. So they represented all the categories present in French society regarding the quotas I mentioned. And actually, to be exact, 200 people were recruited because we had 150 members and 50 substitutes to anticipate the people who would drop out after the first session. And so we had several substitutes who were mobilized to replace these people who dropped out. So yeah, I can explain this process in more details if you want later. I like the next slide, please, Antoine. So I now want to present the deliberation process and method. So the members were gathered during 9 sessions in total, so 7 sessions face-to-face and 2 online sessions because of the COVID crisis. All sessions were organized on 3-day weekends with the members coming from all over France. And there were also 50 online meetings in total that were organized between the working sessions. During the working sessions, the citizens alternated between working all together in plenum and working in 5 thematic groups that were housing, food and agriculture, employment and industry, transportation, and lifestyle and consumption. So the citizens were assigned to one group randomly at the first session, and they stayed in this group for the whole convention. And if you want, I could present the detailed program later, but I won't go into details now. And there were many challenges in the organization of the deliberation, and the most important are that we decided to use the majority judgment method. That is to say that we organized no votes until the very last session, when the members had to vote to approve the measures. So consensus was to be reached only thanks to discussion and deliberation. And so the goal was to define a vision of action that was shared by all the members. And we had to be very careful of the balance between the working groups and the work in plenum, because the members quickly became specialists of their theme. And so we constantly had to make sure that the other members of the convention agreed on the work of one thematic group. And finally, we were very aware of guaranteeing the plurality of information when we chose the persons who came to speak in front of the citizens, to allow them to have all the facets of one question and to make informed judgments. And finally, the results of the convention. So on the 7th session in April 2020, the members voted and approved on 149 proposals. So they included 3 referendum proposals and 2 proposals to amend the French Constitution. 1/3 of the measures were legally translated, and most of the proposals got almost universal support by the members. And so in the direct aftermath of the convention, the reactions were very positive among many different actors, especially climate and environmental associations, who recognized the quality and the audacity of the measures. And many politicians complimented the citizens' work and promised that they would defend them in parliament. So the government examined the 149 proposals, and in July 2020, the citizens were invited to the Élysée Palace, so the house of the French president. And the president promised to implement 146 measures out of the 149. He used 3 jokers, so that were his words, on measures that he especially didn't approve with. And after that, there was a long legislative work that was made, and most of the measures were included in several legislations, and especially in the climate and resilience law, which was voted in March 2021. But many criticisms were made by associations and experts about the weakening of the measures in the legislations, and that the result was not up to the ambition. And so in February 2021, the members gathered one last time for a last session, in which they evaluated the government's consideration of the measures, and they gave an average grade of 3.3 out of 10. So yeah, it's not a very positive conclusion, I'm afraid. And so just one last thing, after this national convention, many others were launched at a more local scale, and we accompanied some of them, so I'll be able to talk about it if you want. And I think that's all for now. You no doubt have many questions. I'll be happy to answer later.
Thank you, Marie. So should we take Antoine's presentation now, and then questions after that?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jan. So yeah, you had the example of Marie's convention, Citizen Climate Convention, which is really interesting to get an example of a structured, really methodologically proved convention. I'm going to talk about a bit of a different example at a more local scale also, so that you can get an overview that's a bit different of the convention processes. So I'm going to talk about a student citizen convention, which took place in a university of a close Paris region. The city is named Créteil, but I don't know if you heard of it. It's a kind of a small city. So the convention was focused on students. The objective was to maximize the engagement of students during the process, so that they'd be able to do kind of everything from preparing the process, convincing elected officials to include measures in the program, following the application of the implementation of the measures. So, you know, like maximizing the engagement of students in every aspect and phase of the project. The theme of the Student Citizen Convention was eating. So that's kind of funny because Marie talked about her work with the alimentation and eating group of the Citizen Climate Convention. And I'm going to talk about a convention focused on students and focused on eating as well. I guess that's logical since we're in France and we talk a lot about eating. So the Student Citizen Convention had three main phases for the participants. The first one was a physical one. It lasted 3 days and had for main objective to make emerging proposals to be debated later. The second phase was digital. It lasted a month and a half, and it was we reported the emerging proposals of the physical phase on a digital platform, so that everyone could share the proposals, deepen them, and formulate amendments to them also, so that they're more detailed and specific during this phase. And then after the digital phase, we had another physical phase, which lasted 2 days, and the objective was mainly to render them correctly and to vote on them to get an overview of their acceptability during the for participants. Perfect. So I'm going to take the 4 phases described by Jan in the introduction. So convincing elected official, preparing the process, executing the process, and impacting proposals on institutions. So for the convincing phase, 3 questions. Why did we do this process? The main objective was to train students to build deliberative processes and reflect, make sure they're able to reflect on their impact on institutions. So it was, before all, a training exercise. It had real impacts and real effects, but it was a training exercise. The other goal was to make sure that participants had a transformative effect on local politics and university practices. And the main, the overview objective was to get research data to be able to study the quality of the deliberation, because, you know, we're in a university, and so researchers were really interested to study this process and take whatever data they wanted to make sure their research could progress in the following days, months, and years. So who took part of it and who took the leadership of the convincing process? Of course, teachers, a small group of teachers, I think 2 or 3 max, took the lead on that, and they were motivated to implement this kind of process for their students, as I said before, but also for research purposes. That's really interesting because I think some of them actually observed the Citizen Climate Convention that Marie talked about. And so they wanted to make a similar process in their own university. And also, of course, major support came from university headmasters who accepted to support this process, and then most importantly, accepted to fund the process, because as Marie detailed, it's a lot of organizations. So, of course, the Student Citizen Convention wasn't as much work as the Citizen Climate Convention, but still, and we needed funds, so we got them from the university headmasters. The initial public reaction was like the CCC, so we launched the process in the direct aftermath of the CCC. So some students were really enthusiastic, but some of them didn't know about the CCC because even if it was really well known in the media, of course, part of the population here. And it was kind of hard work to convince them of a process they didn't hear about before. But we managed to do it. And so we would be able to process. There were no selection criteria compared to the CCC that Marie talked about. Some students were obligated to participate as part of their university classes. I think that's political science students, and also biology students. And some students participated through student associations, especially students that were facilitators. You know, Marie talked about facilitators. She was one of the facilitators, the CCC. Well, we wanted to get students facilitators, and so we asked student associations to send or to make an open call for students who wanted to become facilitators during this process. The topics of the Student Citizen Convention was really interesting because initially teachers wanted to make a convention and organize a convention on climate and health because of the COVID crisis and especially its climate consequences. But during the preparing phase and the convincing phase, they met with university officials and university headmasters who told them that they weren't advancing fast enough on feeding issues inside the university. So teachers decided to redirect the initial plan of the convention and the initial topics on feeding issues. Of course, they weren't doing it only at the scale of the university, but they thought it was a good idea to accept as a basis the feeding issues of the university and to work on them. So as I said before, the initial reaction of the public was pretty good because university was supporting the process from a distance at first when they didn't really know how they would get this process going, but then enthusiastically, and they were really happy even at the end of the outcome of the process. And I guess they were really happy because they accepted to do a second one, launching in September, in the coming September, on digital matters. And also it funded the process. The university funded the process, so they must have been quite confident in the whole same thing. For the execution of the process, as I said, there were 3 phases. So in the first phases, as I said, it was 3 days, half dedicated to learning, with experts coming and explaining their fields, how climate was impacting on feeding issues and on land, of course. And half of the 3 days were dedicated to working groups. So share what they learned from the expert talks, begin to make proposals emerge from these discussions. In the second phase, there were more specialized students coming from the university. So I don't know, digital classes, nutrition diplomas. They went further with the proposals that were online in order to them to be more specific, to be more detailed, to be more adequate to some experts, to what experts students would be able to do with these proposals. And then, if you remember, Marie talked about a legislative group or a law group that was able to give advice to the CCC on how to write proposals so that they would be compatible with the institutions. We had law students that were put into action to write the final proposals. So yeah, what Marie described with technical experts and law experts and stuff like that, we had to reach to students in the university to get them on board in the process and make sure they're able to evaluate and get more detail on the propositions, on the proposals. So the discussions were executed like by the facilitators, the student facilitators, in small thematic groups and with idea development sheets. The main struggle was to keep the time. I think Marie could tell us about that as well. Maybe we'll talk about that in the discussion. It was not easy to stay on topic, of course, as you can imagine. Facilitators have to be well trained. We trained them for 2 days before the beginning of student conventions. So I think that's something to think about when you prepare also the process. If you want to have student facilitators or non-expert facilitators, you have to train them and you have to be sure that they're able to conduct such discussion that may be conflictual or be also obstructed by someone. Fortunately, no obstruction appeared in our specific thematic group, so that was not a difficulty. And then, how did we communicate the results? Well, on the third phase, we had the vote. We had presentations of results to the representatives of the various concerned institutions. And we also presented the results on the digital platform. I put the link there. If you understand French, you can, of course, go there. That was one of the main also tool used by the convention to discuss and present the work they were doing. The public reacted well to the findings. All political actors were really glad and impressed to see that the students managed to understand the details of public policies and propose really specific and detailed solutions as well. The university has agreed, as I said before, to launch a second edition of the convention in September, October. So they must have been happy with the outcome. And about the impact on current politics, that's really interesting as well, because actual political science students today are conducting the meetings with elected officials and public agents in the different institutions that were concerned by the proposals in order to get them to enact the proposals. So that's a lot of work, as you can imagine. They're meeting, like, I think on a weekly basis with elected officials and public agents in order to guarantee that the proposals are implemented and are worked on. And of course, we had to hire several internships dedicated to following the consequences of the proposals. Because it's really important that the general public gets an idea of what's happening with the proposals and that the students be aware of their work and the impact of their work. So we hired several interns in order to make sure communication is well underway, the digital platform is updated and stuff like that. Fast enough in order to be able to get your questions. I'd recommend, of course, this kind of experiences to other countries. It's a great experience, especially to train students and make them realize they are, as citizens, capable of taking important decisions and proposing radical evolutions to public policies with a deep understanding of which administrative scale is responsible for what. So that's an important point. And what to think of about early on. Well, if an objective is to implement direct policy changes, you should think of securing beforehand, as we saw with the CCC was a problem, with elected officials, how the results are going to be implemented without substantial changes to the proposals. It's a basic problem of the representative mandate. You can't force an elected official to implement stuff. So he or she has got free will. That's unfortunate in some cases, especially in the case of climate policies. You can also have a different objective that's, I think, more realistic, maybe, of setting up a standard for all climate proposals from political parties or associations. When you can say in the direct aftermath of a convention, citizens are demanding strong and radical climate public policy proposals. So that's, I think, an interesting objective to have also. That's it for me. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. And I think Marie and I will be happy to hear your questions and remark and answer as best as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine and Marie. It was very interesting to hear your, I mean, this is mostly me asking questions and you are answering them. So now it's up to everybody else to ask questions. If you want to ask your questions yourself, you can raise your hand, go to the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom window and click raise hand, and I'll call your name and you can speak. Or if you prefer not to speak yourself, you can put it in the chat window here. I see that Cecilia Enberg is first on the speaking list, please.
Thank you. Thank you for two very interesting presentations. I really like this idea to work in this way. A question to you, Valentin, or several actually, because I work as a university teacher and it's not very easy to change universities, at least not in Sweden. So what would be your main advice to me if I try to do something like this where I work? That was the first question. And then I had a specific question about the students group in the second phase, I think. Did they work in disciplinary groups, or did they work together with students from other types of education, so more like transdisciplinary? And last but not least, would it be possible to get your presentations, your PowerPoints?
I also have a question.
Yeah, I think that's for me. Of course, we can send you the presentation. I think Jan can communicate them to you if you want.
Yes, we will publish them on our website, on the Klimatriksdagen website.
That's it. What to do to start this process in a university? I think the main point I'd say is to get a small group of teachers that are on board with the process and really motivated in order to show university headmasters that you're not alone and that you have the resources to be able to handle this project and manage the whole thing. I think that's the core advice I'd guess. And then when you have this small group, I think you can begin to plan what your process could and should be. And then when you have the main, I don't know, framework for this process, you can go and then to the university headmasters. I don't know if that would work in Sweden, but that's what I say. Worked in France, so I hope it's the same in Sweden. Students worked in transdisciplinary groups. That was one of our objectives, so that they would multiply expertise in the single groups. That was really interesting as well, because there were drawing on different experiences, and so that allowed them to be more creative also in their proposals. That was, yeah, I think that's really important to I don't know how to say in English, but yeah, go above disciplinary barriers in this sense. I don't know if I answered correctly your questions, but that's what I say.
Yes, I think it did. Thank you very much. I got very motivated to try to test this out. I think one of the problems here would probably be to get the chancellor on board, or vice chancellor of the university on board.
Maybe if this is an obstacle, what would be interesting is to make a partnership with the university that's already done this kind of projects. I can also send you contacts and everything if you want, because then it's proof that it's been working in another context, that you have support from this university, and that, yeah, why not doing it in Sweden as well?
Thank you very much.
Excellent. We have a question in the chat. How did you work with the group to secure trust and open discussions, and that all participate equally?
I can try to begin to answer. We did many things. I will say some of them. First, that is why we divided. That is one of the reasons why we divided the 150 members in 5 thematic groups, to have smaller groups to discuss. And in each of the groups, so we had approximately 30 people in them. We also made them work by even smaller groups of 5 or 6 people. So we had different scales of different sizes of groups, so everyone could speak. When we came back in plenum, we always selected the citizens who had to speak in front of the others at random, so everyone could speak at least one time. There was another thing. I talked about the governance committee, and in the governance committee there was always 2 to 4 citizens who were present at these meetings. They were selected at random and they changed at each session. So the citizens were part of the group who decided the program and how we would work in the sessions. And as facilitators, we were very careful with the people who were not comfortable in public, who didn't like to speak in front of others, and we really accompanied them individually. So we became more than facilitators, we became reference during the convention. So yeah, there was many means to be careful that everyone could speak. So yeah.
Thank you. There's a comment in the chat about also maybe engaging students to create pressure on the chancellor. That was probably relating to the earlier discussions about students there.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I don't see anybody raised hands, so take your chance now to ask the real experts on how to do this. But I have questions of my own, even though I got many of them answered already. So one of the things we are thinking about here in Sweden is, well, should you start locally, do this in local municipalities or maybe schools, as you were talking about, and then grow to larger regions and then to the state level? Or do you think, I mean, in France, it started basically on the state level, as I understand it, and then it has been taken down to the more local levels? I mean, in France, the yellow vest had a large, was a large reason to why it happened the way it happened, I think, why the state took it up. Should we also make sure that we have a small sort of yellow vest movement here as well, but it's a tiny thing compared to what it looks in France at least. Should we help them get going so that the government sees this and does something similar? Or what do you recommend? What do you think we should do? Go local and small, or grow from large into small?
Do you want to answer? Or?
Yeah, I would try. I think it was a good thing in France that it began at the national level, because it gives a reference to all other conventions locally now. So now for the climate conventions at a more local level, the citizens have the report of the national convention and can begin from there. So it's a good thing. But at the same time, the subject is so large and so important that it was really, really complicated to stay on topic and to really answer to the question. So maybe on a national level, choose one or two subjects, maybe food, like the students' convention, and not talk about all of climate change would be a better idea, I think, because it was really difficult. And I talked about 9 sessions. So in truth, we had 11 because we had mini sessions between the sessions during the COVID crisis. And at first, we thought about 5 sessions. The government thought that we could make this work in 5 sessions, and we had to organize 11. So it's really, really big.
That's really good advice, thank you. And well, we have experienced this too. Sometimes when you start a discussion, it takes a bit longer than you expect in the beginning. So, I mean, we heard the scores that the participants gave to this, and when it was put into actual policy at the end, 3.3 out of 10 doesn't sound like very, very high. But if we say that some of this was created or was spurred by the Yellow Vests, what did the Yellow Vests say after this? How did they react?
I don't really know, Antoine. I don't know if you have some facts about this.
Yeah. Well, the Yellow Vests weren't uniform social movements. So there were lots of groups, or lots of different groups. Some on the right, some more on the left, and so there were different kind of reactions to this kind of stuff. What is important to know is that the Citizen Climate Convention wasn't the only response as a deliberative process to the Yellow Vest movement. The year before was launched by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, the Great Debate, which was also labeled as participative or deliberative process, but wasn't as interesting or deliberative as the Citizen Climate Convention. And so I think the Yellow Vests were more reactive and angry, actually, with the Great Debate that was taken place the year before the CCC than the CCC. I think the CCC was a reaction to the Yellow Vest, but also to the climate movement that was really powerful at the time, with the student strikes for climate, the great demonstrations also on this subject. So yeah, I think it was really drawing from different social movements more than only the Yellow Vests.
I guess it's even hard to define what the Yellow Vests are, who is in, who is not. So yeah. It's difficult to measure anything about it.
That's it, yeah.
There is a question in the chat here. Could you discuss a bit the main reasons why the citizens' proposals were not so well implemented by the national parliament or government?
The reasons, it's a bit difficult to answer because we don't really know. But at least I can talk about some examples because I talked about the 3 jokers that the president wanted to have. And it concerned 3 proposals. So that was first, the citizens proposed to change the preamble of the French Constitution. So he refused that. They proposed to implement a tax on corporate dividends to fund climate initiatives. And the third one was the reduction of the speed limit on highways in France. So that was the 3 jokers that he refused entirely. And for the weakening of the measures, I have one example in mind. It is about the local flights in France. I think the citizens wanted to suppress flights when we had a train. How can I say?
A train alternative.
A train alternative of 4 hours, I think, and these measures was divided by 2, I think, and that was the same for many measures. So the measure is present in the legislation. The idea of the measure is here, but the objective is really reduced, and yeah, I don't really know why, but maybe not to anger too many people, and not to be too direct in these measures. But yeah, I can't say why.
I can have some input on that. There's been a really recent article on a French journal that's called Mediapart, which explains or try to investigate why specifically the measures were not so well implemented by the government. And it shows that it's really more of a political administration at the ministry levels during the discussions between the ministries that high, I don't know if it's elected officials or public agents that haven't got the same or the political culture on the environmental issues that is needed for them to be able to enact this kind of proposals and agree with this kind of proposals. So I'd say it's more of a political structure kind of thing, political culture, sorry. And also, if they don't have the political culture to be able to perceive the importance of this stuff, they're more, they will fall to lobbies. I mean, lobbies will have more influence on them also. So that's kind of my take on the subject.
Thank you very much, both of you. I think we're at the top of the hour. So I will just give you one final, very short question. So, I mean, this was a tremendous amount of work. It went a lot of money into this. The results are whatever, you can judge them. Would you do this again?
Absolutely. Yeah, because there is the consideration of the measures in the legislation, and we talked about it. But other than that, at the end of the CCC, the 150 members really had changed, and many of them went into climate associations, political assemblies. Many of them became mayors of some small collectivities or worked in regions, departments, etc. So it really created a very important political engagement in the 150 members, and I think the people around them. So just for that, it was a very, very important process, and I think it will maybe work better in a more local scale, and it's the case very currently. So it was a very good beginning, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that also, and I'd say that for the students that we accompanied, it was really enlightening and interesting to see how they handled the pressure, but also the work that's been doing that's been going on in the convention. So yeah, I'd say without a doubt that we have to say we have to do this more, of course. Yeah, but we have to do this more with really strong and complex methodologies in order for the processes to be strong and reliable.
Excellent. Thank you, both of you, very much for sharing your experiences and judgments about this question. I'm very happy to have hosted this session. As is noted in the chat window, there's a recent episode of Klimatpodden, which is a very good pod, in my opinion, maybe the best one in the world. That is an interview with Sanna Gottby, who is working at the Digidem lab in south of Sweden, in Gothenburg. And it's an excellent episode, so I recommend that you all listen to it. And actually, it's in my plans, in our plans, we have spoken to Digidem that we will have a follow-up session similar to this one with them. So we haven't planned the exact dates and forms, but it is coming. So keep watching Klimatriksdagen, and we will keep the discussion for seeing what we are already doing in Sweden and how we will proceed on the Swedish front. And with that, thank you all for participating. I think it was a great session.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.